Okay, this tutorial is going to look at task number 6, and I'm specifically going to be focusing on the first bullet point, which is where you're being asked to create what's known as a thematic, or in brackets, a choropleth map to present data that you gathered in St Andrews. And the first thing you're going to need to do this is a base map, which your teacher will have provided for you at the start of the lesson, and that's what we're going to be working on now. If you're completing this at home because you missed this lesson, then you will find that there is this base map is part of this assignment, so you can print it off on your own if you want, or when you are, you can ask your teacher for a copy if you haven't got one during the lesson. Let's have a look at how to do this. Now, there's a couple of things you're going to need. First of all, you will need the base map to complete this task, and the base map looks just like this. Second thing you're going to need is the data that you gathered during your trip to St Andrews. Now, if you're missing that data, you can use somebody else's data and just ask them for their numbers. You are specifically wanting the scores that you gave each of the different areas that we visited in St Andrews, okay? And those scores would be anything from a score of 1 all the way down to a score of 10. 10 being a place where you said it had a huge amount of tourist activity going on, and 1 being a really low level, okay? So what you're now going to have to do with your data is put that into a map. And what you want to do is look down your list and see how many locations you gave a high score to, and decide what is going to be your high tourist score. Now, I'm going to select my high tourist score as being anything that I scored 8, 9, and 10. So I'm going to write that on my map, 8 to 10. Okay. I've decided that my medium tourist scores, areas that were not as high, I'm going to go for anything that was 6 and 7. My low tourist scores, I'm going to go for anything that was 4 or 5. And anything that I scored from 0 to 3, I'm going to count as being very low. Right. The next step is to get one colored pencil. And I would suggest it is a color that can show a clear shading variation from light to dark, which means that you should probably start looking at a darkish color to start with. So a darker red or a darker green or a darker blue color pencil would be appropriate. A yellow would not be, because it's quite difficult to create a dark yellow shade and a light yellow shade. So select your color. I'm just, for this example, going to use blue. There we are, and I'm going to start with a very dark blue to show this. Now, I'm going to go around my squares where I scored it very high, 8 to 10. So let's say A1 I scored as a very high tourist score. I would shade that in really dark. I would shade the whole square in with that dark color, just as I'm demonstrating on the screen for you right now. And I would go around all of the other squares that matched that. So for example, I might very quickly just put a little tick in the squares that had those scores, and then I'd come back and I'd color them in for that shade. Next step, I go over to my key and I make sure I color my key in so it matches. So I know when I look at any square that has that shading, that it must be a score that got a square that got a score between 8 and 10. Right, I'm now going to work on a slightly lighter shade. There we are. Selected a slightly, just pressing my pencil down lighter when I color this in, and all of my squares that were between 6 and 7. Now once again, I can first of all identify them by ticking them off, and then I just color them in very carefully, making sure I color within the box, and I do it nice and neat. Okay, I would then work my way down to my next level shade down for my low, and I would identify those squares, and then I might color them in, make sure I color them all in. I'm just doing it very roughly and quickly. And then I want to go for my very low, my squares that are almost indistinct. I'm doing this digitally, so I'm going to select a very, very light blue. And And let's see if that looks lighter. Actually, that looks a little bit darker than the other one. So what I might do is I'll just swap those two around. There we go. It's quite important, as you can see from this, that you are able to create 4 different shades. So when you start shading in the map with the different colors, it's very obvious where those differences are, okay? You can spot them across the map. Right, you've then completed your first task, which is to create your map using a color scheme. This allows you very quickly to spot areas that might have a very high score, or areas of St Andrews that might all have quite a low score. Okay, but you don't need to do what I'm doing right now. It just is why we do this mapping technique. And you'll need this map later on for a bit of writing that you're going to be asked to do. Make sure you stick it in under the title of this particular task. So let's just go back, have a look at what this task is. So take a new page in your jotter, and write down a title. Does tourism vary across St Andrews? We can see that there on the board. And then stick the map down, and then you're ready for your next task.